I stood in my father's office, staring at the papers spread across his mahogany desk. My hand shook as I read the words. Sale agreement. Final. The business I had built alongside him since I was 12 years old was gone. Sold to some corporate giant I had never heard of. My father, James Winters, sat behind his desk with that calm expression he always wore when he made big decisions. The same expression he used when firing employees or closing deals. But this wasn't just any deal. This was my entire life. It's for your own good, Sophia, he said, leaning back in his leather chair. His voice was steady, almost casual, like he was discussing the weather. You never had the stomach for the tough decisions. This business needs someone who can handle the pressure. I felt the heat rising in my chest. The betrayal burned hotter than any anger I had ever known. My throat tightened, but I refused to cry in front of him. I had given up everything for this company. Every weekend, every holiday, every dream I ever had. I had watched my friends go to college while I stayed behind to help him build his empire. And now he was taking it away without even asking me. You promised me, I whispered, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. You said this would be mine someday. He waved his hand dismissively. Plans change. You'll understand when you're older. This is what's best for everyone. I turned and walked out of that office, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Behind me, I heard him shuffling papers, already moving on to his next task. As I stepped into the hallway, I made a silent promise to myself. One day, I would own a company bigger than his. And he would regret what he did to me. My name is Sophia Winters, and that day changed everything. I was 24 years old, fresh out of community college with a business degree I had earned through night classes. While my father built his real estate empire, I had been his shadow. I learned how to read contracts before I learned algebra. I understood profit margins before I understood poetry. The business wasn't just work to me. It was my identity. My father had started Winters Property Group when I was 10 years old. Back then, it was just him and a small office in downtown Portland. My mother had left us 2 years earlier, unable to handle his endless work hours and impossible expectations. It was just the two of us after that. He needed help, and I wanted to make him proud. So I became his assistant, his partner, his right hand. I remembered those early days clearly. I would sit in client meetings, taking notes while my father negotiated deals. He taught me everything. How to spot a good investment, how to read people, how to close a sale. By the time I was 16, I was managing property showings on weekends. At 18, I was handling tenant relations. At 20, I was analyzing investment opportunities and presenting reports to potential investors. You're a natural, he used to tell me, his hand on my shoulder after a successful deal. This business is in your blood. I believed him. I trusted him completely. When he suggested I skip traditional college to focus on the business, I agreed. When he said we would formalize my partnership after I turned 25, I believed that too. I had given him my entire youth, and I thought he was preparing me to take over someday. But standing in that office, reading those sale papers, I realized the truth. He never saw me as his successor. He saw me as free labor. The weeks after the sale were the hardest of my life. I moved out of the apartment my father owned and found a tiny studio across town. My savings account held exactly $3,000, everything I had managed to save while working for practically nothing all those years. My father had always said money wasn't important, that I was investing in my future. Now I understood he was just investing in his own. I applied for jobs everywhere. Entry-level positions, administrative roles, anything that would pay rent. But my resume was strange. Years of experience but no formal job titles. No references besides my father, who I refused to contact. Most companies didn't understand what I had been doing all those years. Some thought I was lying about my experience. Others just saw me as someone who had wasted their 20s working for family. Finally, a small investment firm called Cascade Financial took a chance on me. The pay was barely above minimum wage, and the work was simple data entry. But it was honest work, and it was mine. I showed up early every day and stayed late. I studied everything I could about financial markets, corporate acquisitions, and business strategy. The other employees thought I was odd, this intense young woman who ate lunch at her desk and read annual reports for fun. My supervisor, a kind woman named Patricia, noticed my dedication. "You remind me of myself 30 years ago," she told me one evening as I was organizing files. "Hungry for something more?" "I want to build something," I admitted. "Something that's actually mine." She smiled. "Then you're in the right place. But remember, building takes time. Don't rush the foundation." I took her words to heart. If I was going to prove my father wrong, I needed to do it right. Not quickly, but permanently. 2 years passed at Cascade Financial. I moved from data entry to junior analyst, then to senior analyst. My salary grew slowly but steadily. I lived frugally, saving every extra dollar. My studio apartment had second-hand furniture and no television. I made coffee at home and brought lunch in Tupperware containers. While my former classmates posted photos of vacations and new cars, I tracked my savings account like it was a living thing I needed to keep alive. Patricia became my mentor. She taught me things my father never had: how to build genuine relationships with clients, how to think long-term instead of chasing quick profits, how to lead without intimidation. She introduced me to her network, vouching for me when I had no reputation of my own. Slowly, I built credibility in Portland's financial community. During this time, I heard occasional news about my father. Winters Property Group had been absorbed into the larger corporation that bought it. My father stayed on as a consultant but held no real power. The new owners changed everything he had built, restructuring deals and selling off properties. I felt a small satisfaction knowing his legacy was being dismantled by the very people he had trusted. But I didn't dwell on revenge. I focused on learning. I took every certification course I could afford. I attended networking events even though I hated small talk. I read business journals until my eyes burned. My coworkers thought I was obsessed. Maybe I was. But every skill I gained, every connection I made, was another brick in the foundation Patricia had told me to build carefully. By my 27th birthday, I had saved $50,000 and earned a reputation as someone who spotted good investments before anyone else. It wasn't much, but it was honest. And it was mine. The opportunity came when I least expected it. Patricia called me into her office on a rainy Tuesday morning. She looked excited, which was unusual for her normally calm demeanor. On her desk sat a folder marked "Confidential Investment Opportunity." "Sophia, I've been watching you for 3 years now," she said, sliding the folder toward me. "You have instincts that can't be taught. I want to offer you a partnership in a new venture I'm starting." I opened the folder carefully. Inside were plans for a boutique investment firm focused on small business acquisitions. Patricia had found a group of investors willing to fund the startup costs. She wanted me to be her partner, handling acquisitions and restructuring while she managed client relations. "I can't afford to invest," I said immediately, my heart sinking. "I only have $50,000 saved." Patricia smiled. "I know exactly how much you have. You've told me your financial goals often enough. That $50,000 is enough for a 20% stake. The other investors and I will cover the rest. But more importantly, I need your mind and your work ethic. The money is secondary." I stared at the papers, hardly believing what I was reading. This was real. A chance to build something from nothing, to prove that I could succeed without my father's name or resources. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen Patricia offered. "When do we start?" I asked. "As soon as you sign," she replied. I signed my name carefully, watching the ink dry on the page. Sophia Winters, partner. Not daughter, not assistant, not free labor. Partner. That signature represented everything I had worked for since walking out of my father's office 3 years earlier. It was the beginning of everything I had promised myself I would become. Building Monroe and Winters Investment Group was the hardest thing I had ever done. Patricia and I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. We rented a small office in an older building downtown, furnished it with second-hand desks, and started making calls. Our first clients were small business owners looking to sell, people who felt ignored by the big investment firms. We offered fair prices and honest assessments, something surprisingly rare in the industry. My father had taught me to maximize profit at all costs, to squeeze every dollar from every deal. Patricia showed me a different way. We built relationships instead of just closing transactions. We helped sellers transition smoothly instead of abandoning them after the paperwork was signed. Word spread that Monroe and Winters treated people fairly, and our client list grew steadily. I discovered I had a talent for seeing potential in struggling businesses. Where others saw failure, I saw opportunities for restructuring and growth. We bought a failing bookstore and turned it into a community hub with coffee and events. We acquired a small manufacturing company and modernized their processes, tripling their efficiency. Each success brought more opportunities, and our reputation grew. My personal life became non-existent. I had no time for dating or friendships outside work. My studio apartment became just a place to sleep for a few hours before returning to the office. But I didn't mind. Every deal we closed, every business we saved, felt like another step away from my father's shadow. I was building something real, something that mattered, something that helped people instead of just extracting value from them. By my 30th birthday, Monroe and Winters had acquired 15 small businesses and generated consistent returns for our investors. My 20% stake was now worth over $2 million on paper. But more valuable than the money was the reputation I had earned as someone who built things rather than just buying and selling them. The news about my father's financial troubles reached me through an old colleague. James Winters, once a respected name in Portland real estate, was facing bankruptcy. The corporation that had bought his business had let him go after discovering several questionable deals he had structured in his final years. Without the consulting income, my father couldn't maintain his lifestyle. His expensive house was in foreclosure. His luxury cars had been repossessed. I felt nothing when I heard this news. No satisfaction, no sympathy, nothing. He was simply a man who had made bad choices, just like thousands of others. I had moved beyond needing his approval or wanting his downfall. My life was full of work that mattered and people who respected me for what I built, not what I inherited. Patricia noticed my distraction one afternoon as we reviewed acquisition targets. "Something on your mind?" she asked gently. "My father is bankrupt," I said flatly. "Someone thought I should know." She set down her pen and looked at me carefully. "And how does that make you feel?" I considered the question honestly. "Indifferent. He's not part of my life anymore. His failures don't concern me." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's healthy. But remember, indifference can sometimes hide unresolved feelings. If you ever need to talk about what happened between you two, I'm here." I appreciated her concern, but I truly felt nothing about my father's situation. I had spent 6 years building a new life, a better life. His choices had led him to bankruptcy, just as my choices had led me to success. The connection between us had been severed completely that day in his office. He was simply a stranger now, someone I used to know. That evening, I worked late on a new acquisition proposal. My life was good. My business was thriving. I had earned everything I had. That was enough. When I was 32, Monroe and Winters made its biggest acquisition yet. A regional chain of hardware stores was struggling after years of mismanagement. The owners wanted to retire but couldn't find a buyer willing to keep their employees and maintain their community presence. We offered a fair price and a commitment to preserve what they had built. The deal required most of our available capital, but Patricia and I both believed in the potential. The acquisition succeeded beyond our expectations. We updated the store's inventory systems, improved their supply chain, and trained the existing staff in customer service. Within 18 months, the chain was profitable again. Our investors were thrilled, and our reputation as business builders rather than asset strippers was solidified. This success attracted attention from larger investment firms. Several offered to buy Monroe and Winters outright, offering amounts that would make Patricia and me wealthy immediately. We turned them all down. We weren't building something to sell. We were building something to last. My personal stake in the company was now worth over $8 million. I moved from my studio apartment to a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. I bought reliable furniture and a dependable car. But I didn't change my lifestyle dramatically. I remembered too well what happened when my father let success go to his head. Money was a tool, not a purpose. Around this time, I started mentoring young businesswomen through a local nonprofit. Many reminded me of myself at 24, ambitious but lacking opportunities. I shared what Patricia had taught me, about building foundations carefully and treating people with respect. Some of my mentor went on to start their own businesses. Watching them succeed felt better than any deal I had ever closed for myself. At 35, I received an unexpected phone call. The corporation that had bought my father's original business was restructuring. They wanted to sell off several of their smaller holdings, including what remained of Winters Property Group. The caller asked if Monroe and Winters might be interested in acquiring it. I sat in my office, phone pressed to my ear, unable to speak for a long moment. The business my father had built, the business he had sold without asking me, was available again. It was diminished now, poorly managed for years, barely profitable. But it was still the same company where I had learned everything, where I had given my entire youth. "Send me the details," I heard myself say. "I'll review the opportunity." After hanging up, I sat staring at my desk for over an hour. Patricia found me there, motionless, lost in thought. She sat across from me without speaking, waiting for me to explain. "They want to sell Winters Property Group," I finally said. "My father's old company." Patricia's expression was unreadable. "And what are you thinking?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to walk away completely. That part of my life is over. But another part remembers what that business meant to me before he sold it." "This isn't about your father," Patricia said carefully. "This is about you and what you want. Forget emotion for a moment. Is it a sound business decision?" I pulled up the financial reports they had sent. The numbers were poor but not catastrophic. The real estate portfolio still had value, though it needed better management. With proper restructuring, it could be profitable again. From a purely business perspective, it was a reasonable acquisition target for a company like ours. "It could work," I said slowly. "It would take significant effort, but it could work." Patricia nodded. "Then analyze it like any other opportunity. Make your decision based on facts, not feelings." I spent 3 weeks analyzing every aspect of Winters Property Group. I reviewed every property in their portfolio, every contract, every employee file. I flew to Seattle to inspect their main holdings personally. The company was a shadow of what it had been when my father ran it. The new owners had extracted value without reinvesting, letting buildings deteriorate and relationships sour. But underneath the neglect, I saw the foundation my father and I had built together. Good locations, solid structures, established tenant relationships. With proper management and capital investment, it could thrive again. The purchase price they were asking was fair, perhaps even slightly low given the underlying asset value. I called a meeting with Patricia and our other investors. I presented my analysis without mentioning my personal history with the company. I showed them the numbers, the restructuring plan, the projected returns. I made the case purely on business merits. One of our investors, a sharp man named Marcus, studied me carefully. "This is your father's old company, isn't it?" he asked bluntly. I had known someone would figure it out. "Yes," I said simply. "But I'm not proposing this acquisition because of that. I'm proposing it because it's a sound investment that fits our strategy. Marcus glanced at Patricia, who nodded slightly. Sophia's personal history with this company makes her uniquely qualified to understand its value and its problems, Patricia said. I trust her judgment. The vote was unanimous to proceed. We made an offer the next day. The corporation accepted quickly, eager to remove this underperforming asset from their books. Within 30 days, Monroe and Winters officially owned what had once been Winters Property Group. The day the deal closed, I stood in the old office where my father had told me the business was being sold. Nothing had changed. Same mahogany desk, same leather chair, same view of downtown Portland. But everything was different. This time, I owned it. Restructuring the company I now owned was like renovating a house I had lived in as a child. Every corner held memories, some good and some painful. The staff recognized my name immediately. A few older employees even remembered me from my teenage years. They seemed nervous, uncertain whether I would fire them all for failing to maintain what my father had built. I called an all-staff meeting on my first day as owner. 37 employees gathered in the conference room, their faces anxious. I stood at the front, looking at people who had once been like family to me. My name is Sophia Winters, I began. Some of you knew me when I worked here before. Others only know me through rumors. I want to be clear about my intentions. I didn't buy this company for revenge or nostalgia. I bought it because I see potential for it to thrive again. I watched their faces relax slightly as I continued. I know this company has struggled under previous ownership. Buildings have been neglected. Employee benefits have been cut. Client relationships have suffered. That changes now. We're going to rebuild this company the right way, with fair pay, proper maintenance, and genuine care for our tenants. An older man in the back raised his hand. I recognized him immediately. Thomas, who had been my father's senior property manager for 20 years. What about those of us who've been here through the decline? He asked. Are we being replaced? That depends, I said honestly. If you're willing to work hard and commit to doing things better, your jobs are secure. If you're satisfied with how things have been, then yes, this probably isn't the place for you anymore. Over the next 6 months, about half the staff left voluntarily. They were replaced by people who shared our vision for ethical, effective property management. We invested heavily in building improvements, updated systems, and employee training. The changes were expensive but necessary. By my 37th birthday, the restructured company was showing strong results. Occupancy rates had increased significantly. Tenant satisfaction scores were the highest in company history. The financial performance exceeded our projections. Monroe and Winters' investment in acquiring and rebuilding the company was paying off ahead of schedule. I renamed the company Aurora Property Group, erasing my father's name from the business he had abandoned. It felt right to give it a new identity, one not tied to past failures or broken promises. The name represented a new beginning, a fresh start built on better principles. Patricia was impressed by how quickly we had turned things around. You've done something remarkable here, she told me during one of our quarterly reviews. You took a failing company and made it stronger than it ever was under your father. The comment pleased me, though I tried not to dwell on comparisons to my father. This wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. It was about building something valuable, something that provided good homes for tenants and good jobs for employees. Success wasn't measured by defeating him but by creating something worth maintaining. Still, I couldn't help but wonder sometimes if he knew what I had done. Did he know I had bought his old company? Did he know I had renamed it and made it successful? Did he care? I had no contact information for him and didn't seek it out. He existed only as a memory now, a lesson in what not to become. My personal net worth had grown to over $20 million between my stake in Monroe and Winters and the success of Aurora Property Group. I could have retired comfortably, but the work itself had become my purpose. I enjoyed solving problems, building teams, creating value where others saw only failure. At 39, I decided to expand Aurora Property Group beyond Portland. We acquired properties in Seattle, then Sacramento, then Phoenix. Each new market required learning local regulations, building new relationships, hiring regional teams. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. We were becoming a recognized name in Western regional real estate. This growth required additional capital. Patricia and I decided to bring in new investors, carefully selecting people who shared our values. We turned down several offers from firms that wanted to push us toward aggressive profit maximization at the expense of quality. We maintained control of decision-making while securing the funding needed for sustainable growth. During this period, I finally allowed myself some personal life beyond work. I started dating occasionally, though relationships remained difficult with my schedule. I bought a nicer house with a garden I actually had time to enjoy sometimes. I took vacations, real ones where I didn't check email constantly. I discovered I could be successful without being consumed by work. One evening, while having dinner with Patricia and her husband, the conversation turned to the past. "Do you ever think about your father?" Patricia asked gently. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not the way I used to. I don't think about what he did to me anymore. I think about what he taught me, both the good and the bad. He showed me how to build a business. He also showed me how not to treat people." Patricia smiled. "That's growth. You've moved beyond anger into wisdom." "I still wonder sometimes if he knows what I've accomplished," I said. "But I realize now that his opinion doesn't matter. I didn't do this to prove anything to him. I did it for myself." That conversation marked a turning point in how I viewed my past. The betrayal that had defined my 20s had become just one chapter in a much longer story. When I turned 42, Monroe and Winters celebrated 15 years in business. We threw a party at a downtown hotel, inviting clients, investors, employees, and business partners. Over 300 people attended, a testament to the relationships we had built. I gave a speech thanking everyone who had supported our vision, especially Patricia, who had taken a chance on an unknown analyst with an odd resume. Several people approached me that evening with acquisition offers for Aurora Property Group. The company's success had attracted attention from national real estate firms looking to expand their Western presence. The numbers they mentioned were staggering, enough to make me wealthy beyond anything I had imagined in my tiny studio apartment 15 years earlier. But I wasn't interested in selling. Aurora wasn't just valuable financially. It represented years of work rebuilding something better than it had been before. The employees depended on us maintaining our standards. The tenants trusted us to keep their homes well managed. Selling to some corporate giant would likely mean abandoning those commitments for profit maximization. "You could be very rich," one persistent buyer told me. "Why keep working so hard?" "Because the work matters," I replied simply. "Money is just how we keep score. The actual game is building something that improves people's lives." He looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. But I had learned from my father's mistakes. He had chased money and status without caring about the impact of his choices. That path had led to bankruptcy and loneliness. I had chosen differently, and I was proud of what that choice had created. That night, driving home from the party, I felt genuinely content for the first time since I was a child. I had built something meaningful. I had helped people. I had succeeded on my own terms. Whatever happened next, I had already won. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning 6 months later. A lawyer representing James Winters wanted to schedule a meeting. My father, now 71 years old and in poor health, wanted to see me. The lawyer was vague about the purpose but emphasized that it was urgent. I sat at my desk, staring at the message for a long time. 16 years had passed since I walked out of his office. 16 years without a single word between us. Now, suddenly, he wanted to meet. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately. But curiosity won out. I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a coffee shop neither of us had history with. The day of the meeting, I arrived early and chose a table near the back. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and waited. When my father walked in, I barely recognized him. He had aged dramatically, his hair completely white, his shoulders stooped, his expensive suit hanging loose on a frame that had lost considerable weight. He looked like what he was, an old man facing the consequences of his choices. He sat down across from me slowly, moving like someone in pain. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, two strangers who had once been everything to each other. "Thank you for coming," he said finally, his voice rougher than I remembered. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I replied honestly. "What do you want?" He flinched at my directness but continued. "I wanted to apologize. For selling the business without asking you. For not valuing everything you contributed. For not seeing what I had until it was too late." I felt nothing as he spoke. No anger, no satisfaction, nothing. His apology was 16 years too late to matter. "Is that all?" I asked. My father looked down at his coffee cup, his hands trembling slightly. "I heard you bought the company back. That you renamed it and made it successful. I wanted you to know I'm proud of what you've accomplished." The words hung in the air between us. Once, I would have given anything to hear him say he was proud of me. Now, they felt empty, meaningless words from someone who had forfeited the right to have opinions about my life. "Your pride isn't something I need anymore," I said quietly. "I stopped seeking your approval a long time ago." He nodded as if he had expected this response. "I understand. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I was wrong. About everything. You were always stronger and smarter than I gave you credit for. I let my own insecurities blind me to your abilities." "Why now?" I asked. "Why reach out after all these years?" He was silent for a moment before answering. "Because I'm dying. Lung cancer. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. I don't want to die knowing I never tried to make things right between us." I absorbed this information without emotion. Death didn't erase the past or change what he had done. It just meant he would face the end knowing he had destroyed the most important relationship in his life for money that was now long gone. "I'm sorry you're sick," I said, and I meant it. I didn't wish suffering on him despite everything. But I can't give you what you're looking for. I can't pretend those 16 years didn't happen. I can't forget that you sold my future without asking, then disappeared from my life. "I know," he said softly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I regret it. Every day, I regret it." We sat in silence for a few more minutes before I stood. "I hope you find peace," I said. "Goodbye." I walked out of the coffee shop and drove to my office. I had work to do, people depending on me, a company to run. My father's deathbed regrets couldn't change the past or impact my future. I had built my life without him, and that's how it would remain. My father died 4 months after our meeting. His lawyer contacted me about the funeral arrangements. I attended, standing in the back of a nearly empty church. A handful of his old business associates came, people who remembered him from his successful years. The service was brief and impersonal. When it ended, I left without speaking to anyone. His estate, what little remained of it, was left to a charity. He had nothing valuable to pass on, just debts and regrets. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the father I had known as a child, the one who taught me to read contracts and spot good investments. Relief that this chapter of my life was finally, definitively closed. Patricia called me that evening to check on me. "How are you handling everything?" she asked. "Honestly, I don't feel much of anything," I admitted. He stopped being my father a long time ago. Today was just acknowledging what's been true for years. "That's okay," she said gently. "Grief doesn't always look how people expect it to. You're allowed to feel however you feel." After hanging up, I sat in my garden watching the sunset. I thought about the journey from that tiny studio apartment to where I was now. I had built 2 successful companies, helped hundreds of people keep their homes or find new ones, mentored dozens of young businesswomen, and earned respect in my industry. None of that had anything to do with my father's name or approval. It was all mine. The next morning, I went back to work. There were properties to inspect, tenants to help, employees to support. Life continued forward, as it always had. My father's death didn't change my purpose or my path. I had found both long before his final attempt at reconciliation. At 45, Aurora Property Group managed over 200 properties across 6 western states. We employed 300 people directly and hundreds more through contractors. Our annual revenue exceeded $100 million. More importantly, our tenant satisfaction rates remained industry-leading, and our employee retention was exceptional. We had proven that treating people fairly could coexist with business success. Monroe and Winters continued thriving as well, acquiring and restructuring struggling businesses across various industries. Patricia and I had built something that would outlast us, a company culture that valued people over pure profit. We trained our managers in the same principles Patricia had taught me years ago. Many went on to start their own ethical businesses, spreading the approach further. I finally allowed myself to fall in love during this period. His name was Marcus, coincidentally the same name as one of our early investors but a different person. He was a high school teacher, completely outside the business world. He understood that I loved my work but didn't define myself solely through it. We married in a small ceremony with close friends and family, the family I had chosen rather than been born into. My personal net worth had grown to over $90 million between my stakes in both companies and smart personal investments. But I still lived relatively modestly. Nice house, reliable cars, comfortable lifestyle, but nothing extravagant. Money had never been the point. Building something meaningful was the point. One evening, Marcus asked me if I had any regrets about how things had turned out. Not about my father, I said after thinking about it. That situation taught me who I wanted to be and who I didn't. But I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if he had just asked me before selling. Would I have stayed? Would I have built something different? I'll never know. Maybe that's okay, Marcus suggested. Not knowing keeps you focused on what actually happened instead of imagining alternatives. He was right. The path I had taken, painful as it had been at times, had led to a good life. I helped people. I built things that mattered. I found love and purpose. That was enough. On my 48th birthday, I received an unexpected letter from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Victoria, and she identified herself as my half-sister. She explained that my father had reconnected with my mother late in his life, and together they had told Victoria about me. My mother had passed away 2 years earlier, and Victoria was reaching out now hoping to connect. The letter shook me more than my father's death had. I had never considered I might have siblings. My mother had left when I was 8, and I had no memories of her beyond vague impressions of someone always sad, always distant. Learning she had built a new life, had another daughter, raised feelings I didn't know how to process. Marcus encouraged me to meet Victoria. You don't have to have a relationship with her, he said. But at least find out who she is. You might regret not knowing. I agreed to meet her at the same coffee shop where I had met my father years earlier. Victoria was 10 years younger than me, a lawyer specializing in family law. She had my father's sharp business mind and, apparently, my mother's compassion. We talked for 3 hours, sharing stories about our very different childhoods. Mom felt terrible about leaving you, Victoria said at one point. She was very young when she had you, and Dad's obsession with work destroyed her. She said leaving you was the hardest thing she ever did, but she knew she couldn't take care of you properly in her mental state. I listened without judgment. Mental health struggles were real and valid. My mother had made the choice she thought was right, even if it had hurt me. Victoria and I agreed to stay in touch, to build a relationship slowly without expectations. It felt good to have family again, even family I was just discovering. As I approached 50, I began thinking about legacy beyond business. Aurora Property Group and Monroe and Winters would continue after I eventually stepped back. But what else would I leave behind? What impact would outlast me? I established a foundation focused on helping young women start businesses. We provided training, mentorship, and small grants to get ventures off the ground. The foundation specifically targeted women from disadvantaged backgrounds, those who reminded me of myself at 24 with skills and ambition but no resources or connections. The foundation's first cohort included 12 women. We taught them financial literacy, business planning, marketing, and relationship building. Several mentors from my network volunteered their time. 8 of the 12 successfully launched businesses in their first year. Their success was more satisfying than any deal I had ever closed for myself. Victoria joined the foundation's board, bringing her legal expertise to help protect our participants from predatory contracts and unfair agreements. Working together strengthened our relationship. She became not just a sister but a friend and partner in this new purpose. Patricia announced her retirement around this time. She was 73 and wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren. We threw a massive retirement party celebrating her 45 years in business and the countless lives she had improved. In her speech, she mentioned taking a chance on a strange young analyst years ago who had an unusual resume and fierce determination. Sophia taught me that second chances work both ways, Patricia said. I gave her an opportunity, but she gave me something more valuable. She showed me that my instincts about people were right. She proved that betting on character over credentials was a winning strategy. I'm proud of everything we built together. I cried during her speech, something I rarely did. Patricia had given me more than a job or partnership. She had given me belief in myself when I had none. At 52, I received a call that would bring everything full circle. The corporation that had originally bought my father's business 2 decades earlier was being acquired by an even larger conglomerate. As part of the merger, they were selling off all their real estate holdings, including several properties that had been part of the original Winters Property Group sale. The portfolio they were offering was massive, worth an estimated $250 million. The caller explained that Aurora Property Group had first right of refusal on the purchase. Our track record and regional expertise made us the preferred buyer. They were willing to structure financing that would make the acquisition possible without requiring us to liquidate other assets. I sat at my desk staring at the proposal for hours. This was more than just another business opportunity. This was the chance to reclaim everything my father had built and sold, not just the company I had already bought back, but the entire original portfolio of properties. Every building where I had learned the business as a teenager. Every contract I had studied as a child. Everything. Marcus found me that evening still sitting in my office, the proposal spread across my desk. What's wrong? He asked, sitting beside me. They're offering me the chance to buy back everything, I said quietly. Not just the company, but every property my father sold 20 years ago. The entire original portfolio. And that troubles you because? Marcus prompted gently. Because I'm not sure if I'm doing this for the right reasons, I admitted. Is this a sound business decision, or am I trying to prove something to a dead man who can't even know about it? Marcus considered this carefully. Does it have to be one or the other? Can't it be both a good business decision and personally meaningful? I spent 3 weeks analyzing the portfolio with my senior team. The properties were well located but poorly maintained after years of corporate ownership focused solely on extracting value. The acquisition would require significant capital investment to bring them up to Aurora standards. But the long-term potential was undeniable. With proper management, the portfolio could generate substantial returns while providing quality housing for thousands of families. I called a meeting with Aurora's board and Monroe and Winters investors. I presented the opportunity honestly, including my personal history with these specific properties. I want to be transparent, I said. These are the properties my father sold without my knowledge 20 years ago. That history makes this personal for me. But I believe the numbers justify the acquisition regardless of sentiment. The board reviewed the analysis carefully. Questions were asked about financing, management capacity, integration timelines. After 2 hours of discussion, the vote was unanimous to proceed. One board member summed up the consensus: "Sophia, your personal connection to these properties is actually an advantage. You understand their history and potential better than any outside buyer could. This is smart business informed by unique insight." We made the offer the next day. $90 million for the entire portfolio, financed through a combination of Aurora's reserves, new investor capital, and bank loans. The corporation accepted within 48 hours. 30 days later, the deal closed. Aurora Property Group now owned every property that had been part of the original Winters Property Group, plus everything else we had acquired over the years. Standing in the conference room where we signed the final documents, I felt a strange sense of completion. I had started with nothing, built 2 successful companies, and now owned an empire worth over $300 million. More importantly, I had done it ethically, treating people fairly and building something that improved lives. The integration of the acquired properties took 18 months of intensive work. We invested heavily in renovations, bringing every building up to Aurora's standards. We retrained property managers in our approach to tenant relations. We renegotiated vendor contracts to ensure quality service. The transformation was massive but necessary. During this period, I promoted several long-term employees to leadership positions. Thomas, the senior property manager who had questioned me during my first staff meeting years ago, became vice president of operations. He had proven himself committed to our values and had the trust of both staff and tenants. Watching him grow into leadership was deeply satisfying. The financial results exceeded our projections. Occupancy rates climbed steadily as word spread about Aurora's management approach. Tenant retention reached 92%, unheard of in the industry. Our reputation attracted high-quality tenants who valued stability and fair treatment. The properties that had been deteriorating under corporate ownership were thriving again under careful stewardship. Media coverage of the acquisition mentioned my history with the properties. Several articles told the story of how I had rebuilt what my father had lost. I gave a few interviews, carefully explaining that revenge had never been my motivation. "I'm not trying to prove anything to my father," I told one reporter. "I'm trying to build something valuable that helps people. That these specific properties are involved is just an interesting coincidence." But privately, I acknowledged the satisfaction of owning what had once been taken from me. Not because it proved my father wrong, he had been dead for years and his opinion no longer mattered. But because it demonstrated to myself that I could overcome betrayal and build something better than what had been destroyed. At 55, I began transitioning towards semi-retirement. Thomas and other senior leaders were ready to manage daily operations. I remained chairman of Aurora's board but stepped back from day-to-day decisions. This gave me more time for the foundation, which had grown to serve over 100 women annually. Victoria had become increasingly involved, using her legal expertise to help participants protect their businesses and navigate regulations. My relationship with Victoria had deepened over the years. She had 2 teenage children who called me Aunt Sophia. Through her, I had gained the family connection I had lost when my parents' marriage collapsed. We celebrated holidays together, traveled occasionally, and supported each other through challenges. She filled a space in my life I hadn't realized was empty. Marcus and I bought a cabin in the mountains where we spent weekends hiking and reading. The slower pace suited me. I had spent 30 years building businesses and proving myself. Now I could simply enjoy the life I had created. We talked about traveling more, maybe spending winters in warmer climates. For the first time since my 20s, my identity wasn't entirely wrapped up in work. One afternoon, while hiking with Marcus, he asked me if I was happy. "Yes," I said without hesitation. I built something meaningful. I helped people. I found love. I reconnected with family I didn't know I had. That's more than I imagined possible when I walked out of my father's office 30 years ago. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" he asked. I thought about it carefully. If my father hadn't betrayed me, I might have stayed comfortable in his shadow forever. I might never have discovered what I was capable of building on my own. So no, I don't wish things were different. The pain led to the growth I needed. On my 58th birthday, the foundation held its 10th anniversary celebration. Over 500 women had participated in our programs over the decade. 312 had successfully launched businesses. 47 had grown their ventures enough to hire employees. The cumulative economic impact was staggering: millions of dollars in revenue generated, hundreds of jobs created, thousands of lives improved. Victoria gave a speech honoring the foundation's impact. She mentioned a conversation with our mother before she died, where our mother had expressed pride in what I had accomplished. She said Sophia took the worst betrayal imaginable and turned it into something beautiful, Victoria told the audience. She said that took strength she herself never had, and she was grateful Sophia had inherited Dad's business mind but not his character flaws. Hearing this moved me deeply. My mother had been watching from a distance, proud of what I had built. She had found peace knowing that abandoning me hadn't destroyed me. I wished I had known her in her final years, but I understood why she had stayed away. Some wounds run too deep for easy healing. That evening, sitting in my garden with Marcus beside me, I reflected on the journey from that tiny studio apartment to here. Aurora Property Group was now worth over $400 million and employed over 600 people. Monroe and Winters continued thriving under new leadership. The foundation was changing lives daily. I had built an empire, not through inheritance or luck, but through persistent work and ethical choices. My father had sold my childhood business for my own good without asking. He thought I lacked the stomach for tough decisions. He believed he was protecting me from failure. Instead, he had given me the greatest gift possible, the motivation to prove I could succeed without him. 20 years after he betrayed me, I had bought back everything he sold and built something far greater than he ever imagined. But the real victory wasn't the money or the properties or the success. The real victory was discovering that I didn't need his approval to know my own worth. I had found it within myself, and that was something no one could ever take away. I owned what was rightfully mine, not just the business, but my dignity, my purpose, and my future. And that was worth more than any dollar amount could ever represent.